All right, welcome in everybody to another edition of the College Hoop News Podcast. I'm your host, Tony Patelis. Tonight we're going to be focusing on a lot of stuff. We're going to be talking NCAA tournament. We're going to talk some bracketology, also some conference tournament talk. So let's get right to it. Tonight's guest, he's been with us before, Rocco Miller from bracketeer.org. You can find him on Twitter at Rocco Miller 8. That's the number 8. Rocco, what's up, my friend?
Not a whole lot, Tony. Just trying to keep up with all the action. It's been a fantastic week, and we have even more excitement on the way. Thanks for having me on.
No, I appreciate you coming on. So we got a bunch of stuff to talk about tonight, so we'll get started. We got some tickets punch finally here. We'll start with yesterday's action. So the first ticket punch yesterday, Murray State wins the OVC with a very impressive win over Belmont, 68-51. Not too surprised the Racers won, to be honest, but, to beat a Rick Byrd coach team like Belmont was pretty surprising. They played once during the regular season. I believe Belmont won that contest. But so looking at the Racers, I think this could be a dangerous team. They got 3 really, really good players, Terrell Miller, John Morant, also Jonathan Stark, really talented trio there. What are your thoughts on the Racers? Where do you think they'll be seeded? And do you think this is maybe a dangerous club in the first round?
Yeah, I think Murray State looks real dangerous. They're coming off 13 straight wins. Of course, all 13 of those were against Ohio Valley Conference competition. And like you mentioned, Belmont was their biggest competition, who they were able to take care of. They also beat Jacksonville State the day before, another team that they had lost to on the road during the season and had a close game with at home. So they're playing really good ball. This team's really dangerous and quick. They have Jonathan Stark averages 21.8 a game. He can fill it up. Terrell Miller is also a senior. So you got 2 seniors there leading the charge. And then they have an excellent frosh in John Morant, who's put up some ridiculous numbers in against some mid-major to low-major competition. But
Sure.
This is a team that could give a lot of teams problems. They're gonna fall into that 12-13 area. Right now I have them as the last 12 seed. So we'll see how their other conference tournaments go to determine if they will be 12 or 13. No matter how you shake it, that puts them up against a 4 or a 5 in the first round. And unless they go up against a team that has a lot of size, I think they got a really good chance to get a victory in the tournament. I think if they do face a lot of size, they're in trouble because right now their big man is Miller, who's 6'8". He's 245, so he can hold his own down there, but they don't have a lot to support him. The majority of the other guys are 6'5" and shorter. Kind of reminds me of the Washington team that I watch all the time, that every time they play a big team like Stanford or Utah, they lose every time. So if Murray State faces a big team, I think they're in trouble. But so watch out for their matchup. But they're a very good team and red hot. So hopefully we see them get into the round of 32.
Yeah, I really like this team. They're good on both ends of the floor. They average 78 points a game. They only give up 65 a game, which I think is top 30 in the country. They shoot it well from 3. They don't turn it over too much. So that they have all the kind of makings of an upset pick. Jonathan Stark can pretty much beat somebody on his own if he gets hot. And Morant, as you said, has been tremendous this year. He's averaging 13 points a game, almost 7 rebounds, 6.5 assists. Miller's a big body up front. I agree with you. I had that marked down as well, that I don't think they do well against a team with size, but definitely a team that I think could make some noise, possibly at least win a game in that first round.
Yeah. And Tony, so if you look at today's bracket, I had them matched up with Florida, and I think that would actually be a pretty good matchup for them, just for example. So just pay attention. We'll talk about this again next week, but just pay attention to who they get matched up with, and that will help folks out there trying to fill out a good bracket.
Absolutely. So today, the Atlantic Sun tournament finished up. Just a crazy game. Lipscomb grabbed the auto bid. They beat Florida Gulf Coast on the road, 108-96. Lipscomb had a 32-point lead in this game, and they almost blew it. I think FGCU cut it to 6 at one point in the second half, but the Bison hold on. This is another team that's kind of interesting. They're mostly an offensive club. I mean, they fill it up on offense. Garrison Matthews is a really talented kid. He had 33-9 today. He was 7 of 14 from 3. They average 80 points a game. They're not very good defensively. This is kind of surprising to me. They don't shoot the 3 very well. I thought they did, and they don't. They average they're 32% as a team, which is like 300th in the country. They turn it over quite a bit, so they're going to have to beat you, with their offense. Where do you think Lipscomb is right now on your seed line, and what do you think about this team?
That's a great analysis, Tony. So I think Lipscomb right now is seed line wise, they're probably in the 14-15 range. They do have some really good wins. So they won twice on that floor down in Fort Myers on Florida Gulf Coast home court. And then they also had the sweep of Belmont, their inner city rivals in Nashville. So they got off to a really good start this year. If you look at the quadrant breakdown, they've got 6 wins between the first 3 groups, which when you're talking about this level of team is actually pretty good. They do have 3 really bad losses, so that keeps them in the contention for a 15. I don't think it's a team that a lot of people want to face if they're not good on the defensive end. Like you said, they're all about offense. Matthews, much like Stark, who we talked about from Murray, averages just about the exact same, 21.7. And Matthews has been identified all year long as one of the best low major players in the country, without a doubt. So they're dangerous with him. I think he had that one ridiculous one-handed bank shot from 16 feet today to put a little thorn in Florida Gulf Coast's comeback attempt. But fun team to watch. Really cool story. It's their first trip to the tournament. And hopefully they're competitive out there in their first game.
Yeah, I agree. I wouldn't necessarily pick them as an upset. I mean, if Matthews goes off for 30 plus, I mean, I think they could maybe knock somebody off, but I just don't think they play good enough defense and they turn it over quite a bit, as I said. So it'll be interesting to see. I'm sure you're pretty accurate with their seed. I'm sure they're going to be a 14 or 15. The MVC today, Loyola Chicago punches their ticket. They don't have to worry about it at large now. I don't think they had a great shot at one, maybe a slim shot in my opinion, but they beat Illinois State today 65-49. They've had a really impressive year. They're 28-5. They were 15-3 in the Missouri Valley, really dominated that conference. Porter Moser, really good job with this team. Clayton Custer's a special player in my opinion. They're an excellent defensive club. They're actually top 5 in the country. They're experienced. They shoot the 3 well. What do you think about this team, Rocco? I think they could be maybe a 12 seed. I think that's where a lot of people have them right now. What do you think about the Ramblers?
I love this team. And if you look at the results, they only lost once all year with Custer on the floor. Wow. So I think there's something like 24, 25-1 as long as he's playing. So this team has got a group of winners. They've been together for a while. I've been following really closely. You've probably seen me tweet about them most of the season. I like Loyola Chicago's profile as well. If you look at the history of the RPI and you get a team from a mid-major conference that cracks that top 30, it's kind of a magic number. Coming into today, Loyola Chicago is 28. If you refresh the latest RPI, they're at 26. So if they would have lost today, I don't think they would have gotten in, like you mentioned, just because they would have lost to a team that was too far down the totem pole. However, I think with the way they landed, if they'll end up in this 25 to 30 range, I think they're probably actually going to scoot up to that 11 if you figure a lot of the bubble teams will fall off in the major conferences. Okay. And then with an outside shot of even getting up to the 10, I saw a couple other guys today put them up on the 10 line. I think they're probably safely in that 11 area if you just want to kind of average it out. Right. But it'll be something I'll be looking at all week. They have that win at Florida, so that helps the profile even more. Obviously, that helps their RPI. They also got some really nice road wins during the year at Illinois State and Southern Illinois. It's places that other teams in the MVC couldn't win at. And a dangerous team. I mean, I think this team with the right draw can get to a Sweet 16. And, it could be it already is a really fun story. It could be even more fun once all eyes are on the Ramblers.
I'm actually really glad they won the tournament because I think they're a team that absolutely belongs. They passed the eye test tenfold, but I didn't think they were getting in without a win today. So good for them. Great season.
100%.
I think they're definitely a dangerous team. They do everything well and they're efficient. They're just a tough, hard-nosed team, and they do a lot of things well. So we'll see what happens with them. We'll see. I'm interested to see who they get matched up with. I think that's going to be important. Once the tournament, the bracket comes out. So the Big Ten today, Michigan wins their second Big Ten title in a row. This team is just red hot right now. It just seems like they were in control throughout today. This team is absolutely locked in on both ends of the floor. This is by far, I think, John Beilein's best defensive team in Michigan. He's known as an offensive guy, but this year they've really locked down on D. Xavier Simpson just continues to get better. Mo Wagner's playing great. Jordan Poole he's kind of had his breakout party here lately. They're just so fundamentally sound. They don't turn the ball over. They're efficient. I just would not want to play this team right now. They're one of the hottest teams in college basketball. Do you think a 3 seed is out of the question for this team heading into this tournament?
Not at all. Not at all. So initially, before tip-off today, I had Michigan up on the 4 line in my bracket update this morning, which they were one of the last 4 seeds before today's game. Now they pick up another win against a 2 or maybe a 3 seed with Purdue. And you've already got the Michigan State wins, the 2 of them from yesterday. And then you factor in they've got an Ohio State win and a win in Austin, Texas against the Horns. Their profile is actually, if you look at it, they have better wins than Michigan State. And Michigan State's been at the top of that 3 line for a long time. We have to really start considering, and this is something I'll be breaking down throughout the week, is Michigan actually ahead of Michigan State now on the seed list? I don't think they're above Purdue. I think Purdue's definitely the top Big Ten team coming out of the on the seed list. So I don't think Michigan gets any higher than a 3. I don't want to go past that. But right now, I think they're right there with with teams like West Virginia and Texas Tech. And the interesting thing is West Virginia, Texas Tech, Michigan, and even Michigan State all have horrible non-conference strength of schedules. So they're all kind of equal in that bucket. So now we can kind of cancel that factor out and just look at who they beat, where they beat them, and focus on that. And I think when you look at it, Michigan's wins are a little stronger than Michigan State's. So there is an argument there for them to be above the Spartans. They both could end up on the 3 if West Virginia and Texas Tech don't win the Big 12 tournament. So it'll be closely followed throughout the week.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of happy Michigan State lost because I'm so sick and tired of hearing about them as a 1 seed. I just don't think they earned it. They just had I think they beat 2 NCAA tournament teams during the regular season. A lot of people were pining for them to be a 1 seed. I just didn't see it resume wise. What do you think about the Spartans, and where would you put them right now since they lost the other day?
Yeah, I think more than likely the Spartans are going to end up probably either the last 3, and I could even see them if there's a couple teams below them that got hot, even down to one of the highest 4s. So they're going to. It'll be interesting to see where they end up. I can't see them. They're definitely not going to be a 1 or a 2. I'd be shocked if they were. If there's be a power higher than my analysis that got them there. So I think Tennessee's profile actually. I had Michigan State above them this morning. Now that I'm thinking about it more, I might actually put Tennessee above. So we'll see. Luckily, we still have a lot to find out about Tennessee this week. And so they can certainly play above them. Texas Tech, West Virginia, they're on the same side of the bracket. So if you figure that if any kind of chalk holds in the Big 12 and they get to the final, that would more than likely put them above Michigan State. And then we've got the argument of Michigan getting above them. So if you get all three of those above them, then you're looking at Michigan State on the 4 line. Wow. So they'll be anywhere between 10 to 13 on the seed list.
Interesting. Now, Purdue, they've kind of slid back a bit these last few weeks. I think a few weeks ago, they were firmly on that 1 line. Now it's looking more like probably a 2. What do you think about the Boilermakers right now? Where do you have them?
Yeah, I think right now I've got them as the number 7 overall. I've got them barely ahead of Carolina. Carolina certainly has better wins, but at some point, some of those losses have to add up. The Wofford loss, and then they got a Q2 loss, and they have 7 Q1 losses. So I'll keep Purdue slightly ahead of Carolina, with Carolina still having the opportunity to, of course, climb back above Purdue and even higher than that. They're still in the running for the last 1 seed, I'd say. But if Tennessee or Cincinnati wins their tournaments, I think Tennessee and Cincinnati would land above Purdue, and that could knock Purdue down to the 3 line. So Purdue's going to be either one of those bottom 2s or top 3s.
Yeah, well, Purdue got a huge win. Road win at Wichita State today, so that's definitely going to help their case for sure.
Oh yeah, Cincinnati, yeah, absolutely, yeah, that was huge for them, and they've been lacking those big wins against tournament teams. So you got to figure they'd probably play Wichita or certainly Houston, one of those 2 in the final if it all pans out in the AAC.
For sure. So looking at the Big Ten, I mean, I think it's pretty safe to say the top 4 teams are all locks. Obviously, Michigan State, Purdue, Ohio State, Michigan. We got to talk about Nebraska real quick. They've been a heavy hot topic on Twitter. There's people who think they belong. There's people who don't. I'm one who thinks they don't. Don't get me wrong. They certainly look the part. They played really well down the stretch. They just don't have the wins. I mean, I think it really comes down to that. They have 1 nice win against Michigan at home. And other than that, they really don't have anything on that resume of note. And I looked into their record a little bit deeper, and they only have six out of their 22 wins are against teams with winning records. I was actually shocked when I actually found that out. What do you think about the Cornhuskers? Do you think they have a shot? Because I'm just so sick and tired of hearing about this team, Rocco. Please give me some good news.
Yeah, I've got good news for you. I can't see any possible angle for Nebraska to get in. I mean, the only good news Nebraska got this weekend was that Michigan ended up winning the whole thing, because now they can say, well, hey, we beat the team that won the tournament. Sure. But besides that, you're looking at a team with a non-conference strength of schedule of 274. Any team that's close to the bubble with that kind of non-conference strength of schedule, you're not going to hear me saying they belong in. They would have to be well in, like a Kansas State or an NC State type of profile, which they don't have nearly those types of wins. Like you mentioned, they only have the one win against a tournament team, which is a home win against Michigan. And, they have two really big whammies against them. Number three is they didn't beat anybody on the road that's going to be in the tournament or close to the tournament. Their best road win's Wisconsin. And if Wisconsin doesn't get elected into the NIT, they won't even have a road win against an NIT team. Right. So I think you won't have to sweat it all. And Nebraska fans, I know they've been through it's a football school, so they should focus on that for now. I think, the basketball team is really fun to root for. Tim Miles is an excellent coach. Right. Respect the heck out of that guy. It'd be really cool to see them get in. I just don't think they earned it, especially when you stack them up against the rest of the bubble. They're pretty, I'm looking at about 20 or so bubble teams if you start from, 10 just inside and 10 just outside, and they would be right at the bottom of that list of 20. So they're not really putting up much of an argument with those, considerations that you have to look at.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you. I like Tim Miles. I'm a big Tim Miles fan. I think, they've had a great season regardless. They won 22 games. They're probably going to go to the NIT and get a home game. They were picked towards the bottom of the conference. So it's been a positive season. But,
I wouldn't be surprised. Oh, sorry, Tony. I was just going to say, I wouldn't be surprised the NIT puts them as a 1 seed, because they're going to pack that plate for three straight NIT games if they keep winning. So, the NIT is going to love to have them in there.
Yeah, you got to beat somebody at some point, and Nebraska just did not do that. And they had opportunities too. They had the Michigan game the other day. They played terrible. They really didn't come out to play in that one. That was disappointing, but we'll see what happens. You never know. They could sneak in somehow, but I just don't see it. So before we get into some bubble talk, Rocco, I wanted to talk about the 1 seeds a little bit. It seems to me that those top 3 1 seeds, Virginia, Xavier, Villanova, are pretty firm, pretty set. But then you have teams like Kansas, North Carolina, Duke. What do you think about who are your 4 1 seeds right now, and who are the other teams you think that could sneak up into that top line at some point here?
Yeah, and I am firm with what you said in terms of Virginia, Villanova, Xavier 1, 2, 3, and then I still have Kansas 4 despite yesterday's loss. It's a weird year, because typically you'd look at a profile like Kansas and have 2 losses to Oklahoma State. You got a loss to UW, you got a loss to ASU, and then a few other losses to go along with it. And you're just thinking, okay, the best that profile would be as a 2, but it's been a strange year like that. And then you look to Duke, who's my number 5 team right now, but Duke's only got, they've only got 6 Group 1 wins compared to Kansas's 10. They've got a couple losses in Group 2. Kansas, if you combine the 2 groups, has 18 wins to Duke's 13, and it starts to become, pretty clear that Kansas still belongs above. Not to say Duke can't easily play their way in if they have a good weekend in Brooklyn. Same with North Carolina; they've got the 11 RPI Group 1 wins, and then but there's just 2 in Group 2, so you add it together, they're still 5 behind Kansas. And they've got the kind of a rough home loss with Wofford, as we've talked about several times. So, Carolina, if they get hot and they beat the right teams, I think they'd have to beat a Duke in the final and take out some tournament teams along the way. They could have the resume to get above Kansas. And if you figure Kansas maybe loses early to one of the Oklahoma schools. And then Auburn, I think Auburn, when they did the seed reveal, they were one of those more surprising teams to me back on February 11th. Auburn was revealed as the 5th team, meaning they were 1 spot away from the 1 line, which at that time I had them like an 8 or a 9. So I think the committee is actually putting a lot of weight on who wins this SEC. Auburn kind of stumbled with a couple losses at the end of the season, meaning they were co-champions with Tennessee. I don't know that Tennessee can get all the way to the 1 line. I would definitely look at it hard if they took out 3 tournament caliber teams on the way to an SEC trophy. If Auburn took out 3 NCAA caliber teams on the way to an SEC tournament trophy, I think Auburn would have a compelling case to get on that 1 line. Again, we got to imagine Kansas loses either quarters or semifinals. So I'd say, long story short, Duke, Auburn, North Carolina still are in play for the 1 seed. Purdue's season's over, so we've put them off to the side. They're not in the mix anymore. So that's where I'm at.
Yeah, North Carolina to me is the interesting team. They have 9 losses. You don't really see a one seed generally with 9 losses on their resume, but the wins, Rocco, are just so impressive. I mean, just look what they did in the non-conference. They beat Arkansas, they beat Michigan, they beat Tennessee, they beat Ohio State. They have a lot of nice wins, in conference. I think they beat Duke and NC State. I think they also beat Clemson at home. So they just have a stack of quality wins, the Tar Heels.
Right, and they have a win against Michigan that we kind of forgot about before, and now it looks way better. And so, that's why they're still in the hunt for a 1. And I think, that buzzer beater from Miami earlier this week really just kind of set them back a little bit. And then they, of course, lost to Duke. So they just had a rough week. Knocks them. They're still in a 2 seed position, I think. Yeah. And so, let's see how it goes this week. They're going to have a really interesting game if Syracuse takes care of business against Wake Forest. We'll talk about Syracuse, I think, a little bit later, so I'll save that. But, definitely still in the hunt. Amazing wins.
I think if the Tar Heels go out and win the ACC tournament, I think they have a great shot to get on that 1 line. Absolutely.
Yes.
And would they be the first team with 9 losses to be on the 1 line? I think that might be a first. No?
Yeah, I would think it would have to be. I could do some research and get back to you on that. I know for a fact teams with 9 losses have gotten on the 2 line. But, 1 line, I would have to imagine that's a first.
Yeah. All right, so let's move on here. We still got a lot to talk about. Before we get into the bubble teams I wanted to ask you about and get your opinion on, I wanted to ask you about a few kind of mid-major-ish teams, Rhode Island, Nevada. First, we'll talk about Rhode Island. They've really struggled of late. They had a horrible home loss to St. Joe's. I think they lost that game by 30. They just lost on the road at Davidson as well. They really dropped down this a few seed lines I've seen on a lot of brackets. How did those 2 losses affect Rhode Island, in your opinion, and in your bracket?
Yeah, I have them in the 7 seed range right now, but I'm still kind of comparing them against teams all the way down to a 10. So, and that's going to continue to be the process from here on out till next Sunday. So right now, the reason why I have them as a 7 is I'm going off of some historicals in terms of a team finishing in the top 15 or 16 in the RPI. After Michigan jumped them today, they're still number 16 in the RPI with a strength of schedule, non-league of number 4. Typically, those 2 combinations will get the committee to talk about that team, regardless of their name, a little bit earlier in the selection process, despite the fact that you can go into the wins and the quadrants and the bad losses. That stuff usually comes up a little bit later. So they're going to be on the board and talked about probably starting at about the 5 seed range. Mm-hmm. And I think they'll slip down, and I'm just trying to guess what the committee is going to talk about. I can see them right now anywhere from a 7 to a 9. I think 10's too low for a team with that kind of RPI. Yeah. And so right now I'm settling with the 7, but again, I'm constantly comparing them against everybody I have between like number 24 and number 34. And it's really close. So, and it's hard to compare because they don't play in a league like the big boys do. So their RPI gets more weight than a team from a stronger league.
I'm sorry. That's what I was gonna say. Their RPI I think is 15 right now. Their Ken Palm's 48, which is solid. They have 23 wins. They got they beat Seton Hall in the non-conference. They also beat Providence. So some solid wins. They also beat St. Bonaventure, who somewhat looks like an NCAA tournament team right now. I mean, I think they're safe. I mean, I don't think if they what would happen in your opinion, Rocco, if say they go out and they lose their first game in the A10 tournament, then what happens?
They're in. I mean, there's no chance of them getting knocked out. I mean, they get the winner of VCU and Dayton. VCU and Dayton are today 138, 134. That's still a better loss on a neutral court than a home loss to St. Joe's. So they would take that punch to the face, probably end up around a 9 or a 10 if it happens. But right now, their strength of schedule and their RPI, I still can't see their RPI dropping below top 25.
Yeah.
And, I'm just laying my hat that the committee factors that in a lot more. I know the predictive metrics are on the team sheets, and I think they're going to be used in cases of tiebreakers. Rhode Island could be in a situation where tiebreakers are needed. And if they're Ken Palm 48 right now, actually, I'm looking at their predictive average. So if you take BPI, Ken Palm, Sagarin, they're at 43. So pretty close to what Ken Palm's showing. I would say they would probably drop, unless they got blown out like the St. Joe's game, they probably drop to 50-ish. They're probably still 9 or 10-ish at the worst, with the upside of still getting to 7 or 8 just because of that RPI.
Yeah, in no way do I think they're going to miss the tournament, but I was just curious to see if they slip up early in the A10 tournament, how far down they could drop.
Yeah, it's really interesting, Tony, because the teams from like the last couple of 6 seeds all the way through 10 are so close. And, I hope the committee will put a little bit more weight on championship week than they have the last couple of years, because, the teams are so close. It's really resume changing what they do in these tournaments. And so because I think every game is really impacting who's above who.
Absolutely. And the other team I mentioned, I wanted to ask about, Rocco. Now, Nevada's a bit confusing to me. Now, don't get me wrong. They absolutely belong in the NCAA tournament. They passed the eye test tenfold. I've seen them as high as a 6 seed. Now, I just don't see that. I would, in my opinion, have them more closer to maybe like a 7, 8, or 9. I'm a meat and potatoes guy. I'm a quality wins guy, and they just don't have it. I mean, they have the win over Rhode Island. They beat Boise State twice, but that's really all they've done quality wins wise. And they had opportunities. They played TCU close, they lost. They played Texas Tech close, they lost. How are they so high on the? How are they so high on the seed line? And where do you have them right now?
Yeah, I haven't had them as high as a 6. I haven't even had them as high as a 7 since they lost to Wyoming. So, right now I've got them as a 9. I think they're safely in, like you mentioned. And if you look at their draw coming up this week, they're playing the winner of, let's see, it's Air Force or UNLV. So please don't lose to Air Force, because that will make everybody's brain hurt. But yeah, outside of a loss to Air Force, I think they're still pretty safely in. No worries there. They've already lost to UNLV. That's not awful. And they've got a top 20 NCSOS, non-conference strength of schedule. They got a top 20 RPI. I think they're in a similar position as URI. Boise State's up in the top 45 RPI, which doesn't mean the same thing as it does for a major conference team. Boise State, the Mountain West has been looked at by the committee as a mid-major conference in the last couple of years. They haven't been looked at as a more major conference since they had 4 or 5 bids coming out of there. And so that still keeps Boise State out. But those 2 wins look nice. And they got a couple other nice ones at Fresno, Neutral, Southern Illinois, and that RPI non-conference strength of schedule. So that you just, like I talked about with Rhode Island, you just keep comparing them to those teams. So the teams around them have a chance to jump Nevada pretty easily with another big win or 2 and no bad losses. But you got to figure some teams around there as well are going to take a loss right away, and then Nevada stays safely ahead of them. So I think 9 and 8 is a really safe place to, if you want to just estimate where they're going to land.
Yeah, I've seen quite a few brackets, as I said, with them on the 6 line, and I'm just scratching my head and saying I don't think they're a 6 seed at all. Their metrics are great. I mean, their RPIs, I think 13th or 18th, I think, on Ken Palm, or 19th, but they just don't have the wins. Let me ask you something else. Does the Lindsey Drew injury kind of hurt their overall outlook maybe with the committee? Because they're not the same team without him, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's always a good question, and it's always somewhat of a mystery. I think there are injuries that are discussed, but I don't think they just say, okay, these guys would have been a 9, but now that Drew's out, we got to knock them down a line, and we'll just put 4 more teams ahead of them. It doesn't really work like that. I still think they're looking at the full body of work by and large, and they're comparing that full body of work against another team. The tricky thing for Nevada, as well as St. Bonaventure, as well as Rhode Island, as well as St. Mary's, et cetera, is they're not a major conference team. They don't get the opportunities. So you really have these sample opportunities. I would like them to, I don't know how much it's talked about in the room. I'd love to be a fly on the wall to find out. But I watched them play in both those games against TCU and Texas Tech, and those games could have gone either way. I mean, Nevada could have easily won both. In fact, they choked away the Texas Tech game. I think they led the entire game to the last minute. And that would have been a road game against a top 3 Big 12 school. And then it would just be like, okay, these guys are a 6 seed. So, they're a couple possessions away from being a 5 or a 6. And as long as they're really talking about that, I know that I like this chairman a lot because I know he watches a lot of basketball, and hopefully he has some influence on the other members. So if they're watching the games and talking about these guys, I think Nevada will end up with a little bit better seed than where I have them. I'm just kind of hedging on historicals and just doing all the comparisons that I talked about.
For sure. Oh, that's some good stuff right there. All right, so let's talk about the Pac-12 a little bit. We're going to get into the bubble here. And to me, the Pac-12 is like the bubble conference. I mean, other than Arizona, UCLA, USC, Utah, Arizona State has kind of really fallen back into the mix. I think they're going to get 3 bids, maybe 4. Somebody said they're going to get 5 last night to me on Twitter. I said, you're crazy. They're going to all beat each other up in the Pac-12 tournament, right?
You'd think so. I mean, there is an angle to get 5 teams in, but it would take quite a bit to work out. I'd say that's a pretty huge long shot. Right now,
Rocco, the thing is, excuse me, let me just say one thing real quick, is most of those teams still need wins. So if you lose early in that conference tournament, you're done. I mean, you're not going to make the NCAA tournament. So, I feel the best about Arizona State still. They've been nothing but mediocre these last few weeks. I mean, ever since conference play started, they've been a completely different team. If they lose early in the Pac-12 tournament, could they miss the NCAA tournament, in your opinion?
Well, they play Colorado in the first round, and Colorado's a top 100 RPI team. It's hard because you start comparing Arizona State's entire body of work, and I hate to harp on that all the time, but it's really how the process works. I would probably still see Arizona State likely going to Dayton if they lose to Colorado, but if a couple bids get stolen and a couple things shake a different way, maybe Stanford wins this tournament, which I totally think they're capable of doing. They're playing, I think, the second best next to Arizona, and Arizona's got so many things going on that you don't know what's going to happen with them. Stanford, let's say Stanford steals this bid and a couple bids go and Arizona State loses to Colorado right away. All of a sudden, they might be on the outside looking in. I've got them as getting one of the last 10 seeds right now. But if we want to talk about UCLA, really nice win at USC. They needed that. They needed a lot more meat on their resume to go along with their Kentucky neutral win and their win in Tucson. I think right now Bruins, compared to the rest of the bubble, are safely in. I think they're my 4th to last team in now, so they're they got a tiny bit of cushion for today. I still like USC because they've although their best wins are against 2 mid-major powers in New Mexico State and Middle Tennessee, they've got a nice chunk of road wins. Oregon's road win, it looks a little bit better after yesterday. Utah's road win is a good win. Hopefully the committee respects that because that's a really tough trip in the altitude. They've got they're the only team in the entire Pac-12 that swept the mountain road trip. And I think that deserves a lot of respect. I'm a West Coast guy, so I watch a lot of teams fall when they go on that trip. Okay. And I think overall USC, with their 9 quadrant 1 and 2 wins, compared to like a Syracuse or a Louisville, stands out a little bit higher still. But again, USC's got an interesting draw. They got a bye, and they'll get the winner of Washington and Oregon State, which brings up another bubble team, Washington, who took a tough loss at home to Oregon yesterday. I think Washington needs to win not only the Oregon State game, but also they got to get by USC for a second time to probably get back into the mix. I've got them the 6th team out. USC, if they end up playing Oregon State, which is very possible, they lose, they're probably looking like less than 50% chance to get in. So nobody's safe. UCLA's draw. You want to get into UCLA's draw? So UCLA's draw, they got Stanford or Cal. So barring all hell breaking loose and they lose to Cal, they could probably lose to Stanford and maybe still squeeze in. Utah's got the number 3 seed, so they could actually go all the way to the final and not even play against a tournament team. There's so many different scenarios in this tournament, and Oregon's got a chance to make a run.
I know.
So if you figure Oregon maybe blows out Washington State, even though they just lost to them 4 days ago, Oregon can make a run to the final. There's a lot of different possibilities happening in this conference, and then who knows with Arizona even. They'll be in the tournament, but
yeah,
they have all sorts of turmoil. So
it's just unbelievable. There's so many different scenarios, and all these teams are like right on the cusp of the tournament. If UCLA loses to Cal, Chef Bubbles definitely making an appearance. Definitely.
I look forward to that. That'd be fun.
Yeah. So before I'm going to reel off a bunch of bubble teams to finish up here. I want to get your take on it, Rocco. I wanted to ask you real quick. Do you think that the committee should they bring back the last 10 rule? I'm a big advocate for that. I think it should matter to a degree, at least, how you're playing down the stretch. I mean, I think Arizona State's a perfect example of that. Did you like that part of a resume, or does it not matter to you?
I definitely do. As a fan, I love that. And actually, if you want to go back to 2004, Washington, the school that I follow the closest that I went to, they were awful throughout the year. They started Pac-12 season, or Pac-10 back then, 0-5. And Nate Robinson, a couple other awesome players, Will Conroy, Trey Simmons, just got on a hot streak, and they went and won 11 out of 12, I think, maybe 11 out of 13. And that's back when the last 10 or maybe last 12 games were a factor. And they got from all the way out, not even on the board for getting in, to getting an 8 seed. And they didn't win the Pac-10 tournament. They lost in the championship game to Stanford that year. And that is only because they were factoring in the last 10. In today's world, if you go back and look at 2004, Washington would not have gotten in the tournament. So obviously it was a big factor back then. I think it's good for the game and for the fans, because you get the teams playing the best ball, and that makes for a better tournament. We've seen numerous times where we're all trying to get excited for the first 4 Tuesday and Wednesday, and there'll be a team that just is completely done. Like, why did we even put them in the tournament? They'll get blown out by 20, and that's it. We turn the game off at halftime. So I agree. I'd love to bring that back. I think it's a great piece of the equation.
It's funny. The first team I want to ask you about is Alabama, and I feel like they're a perfect example of of this rule. This is a team. They're 17-14. Their RPI is 60. Ken Palm is 53. They do have a stack of quality wins. I mean, they beat Rhode Island, they beat Texas A&M, Auburn, LSU, Oklahoma, Florida, Tennessee, but they've lost 5 in a row down the stretch here. They could have 15 losses if they lose in the first round of the SEC tournament. You can have all the, quality wins you want, but at some point you have to look and say, this team lost 15 ball games. So what do you think about their chances of possibly missing the NCAA tournament? Do they have to win a game or two to feel comfortable? What do you think about the Tide?
Yeah, I think they really need to win that Texas A&M game on Thursday. It's a rematch from yesterday. I think it's tricky because I keep trying to compare them to Vanderbilt last year, which was a totally opposite story. Vanderbilt was way out of it, and then they got super hot, made it to the SEC championship game, had 15 losses, and they were the first team ever with 15 losses to get in. Now, Alabama, if you figure they don't win the SEC tournament, will try to be the second team with 15 losses to get a bid. Now, like you said, they have the wins to get in, much better wins than a lot of the other teams they're close to. However, they have a huge amount of losses, 14 already. Their only road wins, and this is the thing I look at closely that I think would really keep them out, are at LSU and at Florida. Luckily, Florida's been playing better, so that looks better. But right now, LSU's on the outside looking in. So if you look at it from that perspective, they've only got one road win against a team inside the field. The other big wins were all in Tuscaloosa. So, I think Alabama, to really be able to even breathe a little bit, needs to win that Texas A&M game. I'm going to probably have to move them out of the bracket if they don't win that. So, a lot on the line this week.
Definitely. I just feel like in these situations with teams with double-digit losses, we focus so much on and say, oh, well, they have all these wins. But you got to remember, too, they lost a ton of games. I mean, that should matter. We'll see what happens. LSU is another team in the SEC I wanted to ask you about. 17-13, 8-10. Really nice wins, though. That Michigan win at Maui's looking better and better for them. They beat an
Yeah.
NCAA tournament team in Houston. They swept Texas A&M. They swept Arkansas. Beating Arkansas on the road is not easy. Their metrics aren't great, though. They're 59 on KenPom. They're 88 RPI. They also beat Mizzou as well. What do you think about the Tigers? Do they have to make a run in the SEC tournament? What do they have to do to get in the NCAA tournament, in your opinion?
Good question. This is one of the teams I'm most curious about, because if you look at the RPI as a standalone, they're 88, and if you're 88, you don't really have a chance at selection.
Right.
However, the way the team sheet's laid out, they actually take a cumulative ranking of both RPI, KPI, and SOR, and they're 68, which is much better than 88. If you're 68 and you think about it like an RPI, they actually might have the wins to sneak into Dayton right now. So I'll be interested to see what the committee does with that if they're in a similar position in a week. However, based on what we know and based on all the precedent that's been set in years past, I'm banking it off the 88, and I think they don't have a chance unless they can beat Mississippi State again, which they'll play again on Thursday. And then they got Tennessee right after that, and that's a big challenge. They get that Tennessee win. Obviously, their RPI skyrockets into a safer zone of selection based on historical. That would also get them in the semifinals, get them playing on Saturday, which is a day where there's not a lot of teams playing left. So I think honestly, from what I can see today, LSU needs to get to Saturday.
All right. So basically, get to the semifinals, you got to be feeling pretty good.
Yeah, because that gives them a win against Tennessee, and that's another huge marquee win away from Baton Rouge.
Yep, definitely. I agree with you. I like this team. I think they've been a nice story. I think Tremont Waters has been tremendous. Will Wade already making an impact in year one. So Syracuse is next. This is a team that seems to be on the bubble every single year. They did pick up a really nice win against Clemson yesterday. I think that's going to help them quite a bit because they don't really have a great resume, in my opinion. They have a win over Miami. They beat Louisville, who's kind of on the fringe right now. Virginia Tech is an NCAA tournament team, in my opinion. They're 19-12 overall, 8-10 in a really good ACC. Pretty good metrics, 42 RPI, KenPom 51. What do you think about the Orange? What do you think about their chances?
Yeah, so Syracuse is right on the cut line for me. I have them as the last team in today. Tough draw in the ACC tournament, though. And I think so they got to play Wake Forest on day one, Tuesday. So the chances of them winning that tournament are slim to none. They got to win 5 games in 5 days. Then after they beat Wake Forest, if you imagine they do, they'll play North Carolina. They get that North Carolina win. I think Syracuse fans can feel a lot better. Chances are they don't, and that's where their season ends, would be Wednesday night. So really interesting because right now they're 42 RPI, like you mentioned. Historicals say if you're inside that top 47, 48 as a high major team, you're going to get in. So we'll have to see how every other team around them does. Right now, they're the last team in. They're really similar to Marquette, in my opinion, in terms of resume. Lucky for Syracuse that the win at Miami is starting to look a lot better after the week Miami just had. They had an outstanding week with the buzzer beater at North Carolina and then another quality win yesterday. So as of right now, Syracuse last team in. But if you think about it from a holistic standpoint and potential bids being stolen and some other teams below them getting hot, not having as tough of a draw as Syracuse has, I'd say if you had to bet on it right now, I'd say they'd maybe land in the NIT just barely. But definitely the closest in or out team out there that you can find.
Well, if they do miss, it will be entertaining because Jim Boeheim will blow a gasket, and that's always fun.
Absolutely. You can count on that. It'll be on ESPN all night long.
Oh, yeah. All right, so a couple more teams here, Rocco, before we wrap up. Texas is one of these other teams where, they have 13 losses. They're 8-10 in conference, but they have a lot of nice wins. West Virginia, Texas Tech, Oklahoma State, Oklahoma, TCU. They beat Alabama in the non-conference. Their metrics are pretty good, but again, you got those 13 losses. They're a brutal team to watch. I mean, this is just not a fun basketball team, in my opinion. They can't shoot the ball for the life of them. They're just, I don't know. I mean, they have nice wins, but they don't pass the eye test, in my opinion. But again, that doesn't matter much. What do you think about the Longhorns? Where do you have them right now?
Yeah, I've got Texas squarely in as the highest 11 seed. And, after doing some more analysis, I have Alabama below them. So that might actually get them closer to 10. So I think right now they're fairly safe. That overtime win over West Virginia was huge because West Virginia is a team in a protected seed range, a 1 through 4 seed. And, that just gives them a really nice notch under their belt on top of what they already had. Their RPI is right at 50, which is kind of the magic number. You want to be inside that. Unfortunately for the Horns, they got Iowa State, the only team guaranteed to not make the tournament. So if they don't show up in Kansas City and they lose to Iowa State, who usually gets a lot of fans in Kansas City,
definitely,
there's an open door for them to not make it. Just if you think, if they lost to Iowa State, theoretically could potentially put them in the 60s RPI. Then they're really in danger. But otherwise, I think they get that cycle and win. Then the Horn fans can feel good.
Yeah, I think so too. I think that win yesterday against West Virginia is going to really help their cause. Marquette is a team that you mentioned. I wanted to ask you about them. 18-12, 9-9 in conference. They swept Seton Hall. They swept Creighton. So that's going to help them, I think. Providence, they also got a road win at Providence. They didn't do pretty much anything in the non-conference, so I think that's going to hurt them. Their numbers are decent. Ken Palm, 50, RPI 57. Is Marquette in or out right now? Maybe a playing game type of team?
They're really close. They're my last team out, top team out, however you want to say that. So I think the fact that they lost that game against DePaul and they have a home loss with Georgia, so those are both quadrant 3 losses. It kind of makes that stand out a little bit further than Syracuse. I think the resumes are really similar. But if you look at Marquette's RPI, it's 15 spots lower than Q's. They're at 57. That also hurts a little bit. They're below that magic number of 50. So I think right now they just barely fall short. It'd be heartbreak in Milwaukee if it happens. And then if you look at their draw too, this is kind of what makes me think they're out even more if you want to look at it from a realistic standpoint. They get a rematch with DePaul, but if you figure they win that, they got Villanova. And it's really hard. I got to see Marquette in person this year at Xavier out in Cincy, and they just looked awful. Xavier, the game wasn't even close after the first 5 minutes. And I was like, man, I thought I was going to come to this game and see 2 tournament teams. And at that point, and for the last month until that win against Creighton yesterday, I thought Marquette was an NIT team for sure. Now they're back in the picture a little bit more with the sweep of Creighton. I was never really high on Creighton all year anyway. The thing that I'm most high about on Creighton is the fact that their AD is the committee chairman. That might take them from like a 10 to a 9 if everybody wants to, get his respect. So I think Marquette right now they still don't have it, just barely. I think if they beat Villanova this week, sure, yeah, they're in. But realistically speaking, I don't see it happening.
Yeah, Marquette's kind of a one-trick pony. If they're knocking down threes, they're pretty dangerous and they can kind of play with anybody. But if those threes aren't falling, they're pretty mediocre because they don't play defense. So it'll be interesting to see. All right, so we're gonna finish up here. I wanted to ask you about 2 mid-major teams. Rock, we'll get your opinion. Middle Tennessee State is a team kind of like eye test. They pass tenfold. They're 24-6. Just they don't have the wins. Their 2 best wins are really Western Kentucky twice. Other than that, they just don't have it. Now, their metrics are really good. I think they're 27th in RPI and 45th in KenPom. Is this team going to get an at-large bid if they don't win the Conference USA tournament? I hope they do because they certainly belong. But, again, you got to look at that resume and those quality wins, and they're just not there.
Right. So, in my opinion, I think they have to lose to Western Kentucky in the final to get in as an at-large. Obviously, if they win the tournament, they're in. Right now, the way the draw is set up, they would have a rematch with Marshall. Marshall just swept them, and that kind of put them in a danger position. Before that game, I had Middle Tennessee about 6 or 7 spots in where they were. So that loss really hurt because it's a second quadrant 3 loss to go with their home Belmont loss. There's a case to be made. They're 27th RPI, maybe 28th now, and their non-conference strength schedule is number 7. The committee continues to harp on that like I expect them to. I think Middle Tennessee to be in all the conversations till the very last couple of selections if they do lose to WKU at the end. Right now, WKU sitting at number 54 RPI. If you figure WKU wins that tournament, they'd probably be in the mid-40s somewhere. So that actually wouldn't be a bad loss. Middle Tennessee would be kind of in the same place. I could see them squeezing in if enough bubble teams around them choke and there's not more than 2 bids stolen. So yes, there's still an opportunity. I think it needs to go down like that, because if they lost again to Marshall, that's another loss against a team in the 100 range, and it's not going to cut it. So that's what I think the Blue Raiders are up against. And I agree with you. I love watching this team. I think they're strong. I think they earned clout by winning games the last 2 years in the tournament. And I would love to see them in. It makes a better tournament with a Kermit Davis coach team.
Absolutely. And the final team I wanted to ask you about is St. Mary's. It's funny. You see all types of opinions on the Gales. Some people say they're a lock. Some people have them in the play-in games. I know Eli Betker doesn't like them at all and has them out of the tournament right now. They had a really big scare last night with Pepperdine. They did win the game. You know, I think to make it life easy, just go win the WCC tournament. Just go win it. Get it. Pick up another win against Gonzaga. You're golden. You get the auto bid. You don't have to worry about it. I think they're an NCAA tournament team just by watching them. You know, I know they only have that one resume win against Gonzaga, really, to talk about. But what do you think about the Gales? Where do you have them? Because again, I see so many different opinions on this team.
Yeah, so I've got the Gales in the play-in round right now, and I think if they had lost last night, they were out.
Yeah.
Their RPI is at 37. And again, not to harp on RPI forever, but the historicals for mid-majors is you need to be top 30 to be safe. They're not going to get in the top 30 unless they beat Gonzaga. And of course, if they do that, they're already in. So I think, you know, if they just do what they need to do tomorrow and beat BYU, they should hover around the same resume status. You know, that gives them another Q2, 3 type win, a third win against BYU. I would say they'd probably hang on and get in, but it's going to be so close. And I mean, they don't want to be in that position. I really want to see them in the tournament. I've covered 3-4 of their games this year. They're a fun team to watch. They're an excellent team. They're a team capable of going to the Sweet 16, even if they have to go to Dayton first. Mm-hmm. So we'll see how it shakes out. They're definitely going to be at risk, though, if they can't win this tournament.
Yeah. You know, they kind of frustrate me because I'm a big St. Mary's fan. I like to watch I like their program. I like what Randy Bennett does there. But they kind of just shoot themselves in the foot every year, Rocco, with these non-conference schedules. You know, they just kill themselves. You know, I just don't understand the logic in it because they have opportunities. You know, they could have played Grand Canyon this year. They could have played Nevada this year. And they turned it down, and that would have certainly helped their. How about a win against Nevada right now? How huge would that be towards their resume right now?
Yeah, of course, that'd be huge. It would have helped everything too. I mean, even just playing against Nevada instead of Sacramento State, even if you lose, get your RPI higher.
It doesn't hurt you. It doesn't hurt you.
It's always been a big part of Randy Bennett's philosophy to play and just get the confidence of beating up on teams versus playing a game that's competitive. They finally did that home and home with Dayton, but Dayton had a down year this year. So that didn't really help them this year. It helped them last year a lot.
Yeah.
So, you know, it confuses me that they don't do it. I think it confuses everybody. I listen to a lot of podcasts and I hear this conversation all the time. It's unfortunate. They're good enough to hang with the big boys. Right. You know, it's just Randy Bennett and how he wants to set up his schedule. And, you know, in the beginning of the year, it kind of looked like they would have a decent schedule playing in the Wooden Classic and Dayton and, you know, a couple other games. So, but it just didn't work out that way. And now it's all the way down to 184 non-league. And that's a real big danger zone place for the last couple spots for selection.
Yeah. And, you know, they barely left the state of California the first few months of the season. I mean, it's exactly. You know, and they, you know, a lot of their fans will blame it on, oh, it's tough to schedule. No, it's not. Like I said, you had opportunities. You had teams that wanted to play you, and you turned it down. Period. Don't even argue. Come on.
Yeah, I love what Florida Gulf Coast and Middle Tennessee did. They just scheduled 2 games, home and home, in the same season together. Like if we had Nevada and Rhode Island and St. Mary's and a few others doing that, they could actually kind of rig the RPI to their favor. Sure. Part of the reason why Middle Tennessee is all the way at 27 and 7 in non-conference strength of schedule is because they did that, and they also made sure they played Belmont, and you know, so and they got into some tournaments, and that's all St. Mary's needs to do. Just the model's already been created, just follow it, and then you know, kind of you need to bind together if you're in that position because the major conferences are just equipped with millions of opportunities compared to the mid majors.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And it's a great conversation though, because fans will never buy into you know, if we didn't play anybody. It wasn't our fault. Yeah, it was. So sorry. Before we wrap up here, just some quick humor. I know you're a bracketologist, Rocco. So I had two awful questions this weekend. Somebody asked me if Davidson was going to be an at-large team, and somebody asked me if Marshall was going to be at-large team. I thought that would make you laugh.
Do you need me to comment on that?
If you want to, go ahead.
Well, right now Davidson sitting at 82 RPI. They only have 2 wins in the top 2 quadrants. I think that's all we need to say about that. And then Marshall sitting in the 100s, and really only opportunity left is to beat Middle Tennessee and then lose to Western Kentucky. Yeah. That at best gets them in the 90s. So I'm going to go ahead and say sorry, guys.
All right. Sorry, followers who asked me that this weekend.
Yeah, sorry, followers.
It's not going to happen.
We still love you.
Davidson's playing really good basketball. I wouldn't be shocked if they won the A-10 tournament. I really wouldn't.
Absolutely not. Yeah, and that's another team I got to see in person this year. They have all year long they've had the highest assist to turnover ratio as a team in the nation. They don't turn the ball over. I think they're lowest in the nation in turnovers. Aldridge can fill it up. If anybody watched that Davidson St. Bonnie's game, it was unbelievable. Davidson, a bunch of chances to win it. Unfortunately for them, they didn't.
Yeah.
But once they get in that A-10 tournament, especially if you look at the way Rhode Island's playing lately, I wouldn't be surprised if we saw hang on, I'm going to check the bracket, make sure this is possible, but I wouldn't be surprised if we saw St. Joe's or Davidson make a big run here because they're both playing well. And yeah, that is a possibility to be in the final. That's the number 3 and number 4 teams.
St. Joe's, I really feel for them because they had some huge injuries this year. They could have been a really dangerous team in this conference, but they lost Charlie Brown. They lost Kimball as well. On paper, when they're healthy, they have the most talented roster in the conference. I don't think that's even an argument, but, they had those 2 big injuries early on and they're just not the same team.
Right. But, if you look at their last 3 games, they got a road win at Richmond. They had the game at Rhode Island, and then they took care of LaSalle yesterday. They got the double bye. So they only have to win 3 games in 3 days instead of some of these other draws where there's either 5 wins in 5 days or 4 wins in 4 days. So there is a path for St. Joe's to do it. So could be a team to watch. We'll see.
Absolutely. All right, guys. So that's going to wrap it up for tonight's podcast. I really appreciate Rocco joining us. Next week, okay, big announcement. I'm sure you've heard it on Twitter. If not, we're going to do a live podcast next week, right on Google Hangouts as we do every week. We're going to have a selection show, post show. As soon as the bracket's revealed, we're going to jump onto YouTube. We're going to talk about it. Kevin Sweeney's going to be here. Eli Betker is going to be here. Also, Rocco's going to join us as well. It's going to be a great time. It's going to be a long show. We're going to break down the brackets, the seedings, all that good stuff. So we'll see you next week. Rocco, thanks for joining. I really appreciate it. I hope you have a good week.
You too, my man. Thank you. My pleasure.
All right, guys. We'll talk to you later and see you next week for the live show. Hope you can join us.